Welcome back to From Washington al Mundo. My name is Mauricio Claver-Carone, and I'm here with my guest, Shahriar Etminani, talking about Iran and Iran policy. Shahriar, before I give you the free reign to make the case for regime change in Iran, which I love when you make, because it's very convincing. You know, we are on Cristina Radio, and one of the issues that I find inspiring, that is important, are women. And you and I have talked, the irony of when Secretary Clinton was being advised that the reformist movement, didn't want people to get involved because at the end of the day it might be counterproductive. Most of the people out on the streets in the Green Movement, there was a lot of women. I mean, women took a real prevalent role, and we saw the Neda, the young girl, really caught the attention of the world, who was shot and died. Explain to me, first of all, kind of the role of women in Iran and the role of women in the pro-democracy movement, which I find so inspiring, because as you know, I'm of Cuban descent, and we see, with the ladies in white in Cuba, women always play a special role, and I saw that, and that really stood out in the Green Movement. Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I think, fortunately, the women are leading the way. And fortunately, they will have a much bigger than their share of say on what's going to happen in the future. And I hope that's the case, because clearly the men have not done a terribly good job. One of the reasons the women are at the forefront of the democracy movement in Iran, and probably you could say in the rest of the Middle East, is because of their place in society under these regimes. So in Iran, a woman, by definition, is a second-class citizen. So we all lost in the 1979 revolution. The women lost a lot more than men. So the women went from at least legal equality, if not necessarily social equality, to being second-class citizens by law. And therefore, the women will gain the most if we succeed in creating a free secular democracy. And that's why you see the women, one of the reasons you see the women at the forefront. And it's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, this very active, successful Iranian lady, and she was, talking about Fareed Zakaria, and how he's come out lately, just absolutely, the CNN anchor, just absolutely in love with the Islamic Republic. And one of the things he said on air was, well, the women in this country are successful, or doing this, doing that. And she said, I cannot find anything more insulting, because the reason the women in Iran are doing what they're doing and succeeding somewhat is because of themselves, in spite of the regime. And the way some of these commentators put it is, well, Iran isn't that bad, because look how, the percentage of educated women, the business, etc., etc. So Iran is not that bad compared to Saudi Arabia, but they fail to acknowledge or understand that the women are successful because of their own abilities, in spite of the hurdles that the regime has put in front of them. So I think it's important to put put that out there.
And I think one of the trends of history that a lot of these regimes like to conveniently forget, but we've seen, usually the most repressed eventually then come out as the most active and eventually end up in power, whether it was, from Václav Havel in the Czech Republic to Lech Walesa in Poland, Nelson Mandela in South Africa. A lot of people have been surprised almost, when they see in North Africa the Arab Spring. They talk about, the Muslim Brotherhood, doing fairly well, doing well in the elections. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, doing well in the elections. And I say that shouldn't be a surprise. They were the most repressed, per se. That doesn't. I'm not validating them in any way whatsoever, or agreeing with them. But part of the reason that you have it's almost like the contrast of repression and things of the sort. Make the case for regime change.
And again, we'll stick with the ladies issue and Secretary Clinton issue, and the whole reform versus regime change. One of the things I like to point out is when State Department and certain Iranians and Iranian leaders and others consistently claim that the people of Iran don't want regime change, they want reform. One of the things I pointed out to them is, as you said, the leaders of the demonstrations and the democracy movements are the women of Iran. So are you telling me that the women of Iran are so stupid that they're willing to go out in the streets, risk rape, torture, murder, and imprisonment, just so that they can remain second-class citizens under Reform Islamic Republic? I would like to give them a little more credit than that. Yeah. Unlike some of the State Department who still claim that the people of Iran don't want regime change, that they just want to reform this crazy barbaric system. So to go back to the regime change issue, let's look at it on the as an American perspective. For most of the last 3 decades, the dialogue in this country has basically been schizophrenic policy between engagement, negotiation, and appeasement to the other extreme of war and bombing. And you could see just in the last 2 years, the pendulum has swung from President Obama's quest for negotiations to the other extreme that all we hear today is bomb, bomb, bomb. In my opinion, both those scenarios will be disastrous. I'm speaking as an American, I'm speaking as an Iranian, I'm speaking as a Democrat. Yeah. I believe that the best case scenario when it comes to Iran is to help the Iranian people get rid of this regime and to create a free secular democracy. And that's best case for the Iranian people, that's best case for the neighborhood, and that's the best case for the world at large. The issue is that when I speak to congressmen and senators and other policymakers, except for the State Department, who disagree with me, but most rational people who know what's going on agree with that best case scenario. The problem is there has not been one iota of help for the Democrats of Iran. There has not been any focus on the best case scenario, and it's not just the best case scenario, it's the only half decent scenario. Because all the other scenarios are disastrous. War could be absolutely catastrophic. To be honest with you, I don't know what will happen if there's bombing. I think anyone who claims they know what's going to happen is just absolutely, talking nonsense. No one knows what's going to happen, but I don't want to take that risk. Yeah. On the other hand, we have people, within the State Department and other regime supporters who are talking, to talk about containment. Oh, well, we managed to contain the Soviet Union, we can contain this regime. I think that's preposterous. And, let me just read a quote from Khomeini, which kind of underlines the mentality of this regime. And once you understand this, you tell me whether you can contain this regime or not. This is a quote from Khomeini in 1982. Quote, "We do not worship Iran, we worship Allah. For patriotism is another name for paganism. I say, let this land burn. I say, let this land go up in smoke, provided Islam emerges triumphant in the rest of the world." That's the mentality of the creator of the Islamic Republic. That's the mentality of his disciples. I don't think you can contain this regime with nuclear weapons. So war is a disaster, and nuclear Iran is a disaster. Negotiations have failed. I think any sane person pretty much has given up on that. So the only viable option is to help the Iranian people create a free secular democracy, which by definition is an absolute end to this regime. Now, that doesn't mean that we will not welcome any and all aspects of the current regime turning against the regime and joining us. Absolutely. I've said it many times, and I think most of the true Democrats believe this. I'm willing to stand with anyone that is willing to help the Iranian people in their quest for freedom and democracy, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they've done. It doesn't matter what their history is. If Khamenei tomorrow took off his turban and joined the people in their quest for freedom and democracy, I'm willing to stand by him.
Well, although that's somewhat unlikely. And I want to clarify something. I used the term regime change somewhat loosely per se, but in the last 10 years, kind of it's taken more of a war tone, etc.
Yeah.
But helping people achieve democracy, helping people achieve freedom is the most American and it is the most democratic of principles. It's what happened to help our colonists here in the United States free themselves from Britain and things of the sort. And with that, I'm going to leave the subject, and I welcome you back to Let's Talk More about Iran. We can talk weeks on this issue. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, from Washington al Mundo with Mauricio Claver-Carone.
From Washington al Mundo es una producción de National Latino Broadcasting.